Thank you very much for welcoming me. I'd like to take this opportunity to put the light on two aspects of Tilak MREL proposal. The first one being, the first one being the question of MDA, and the second one is about internal MREL. So the maximum distributable amount was introduced after the financial crisis to ensure that an entity with a lack of CET1 would not distribute dividends, but rather capitalize the proceeds to be safer and stronger before thinking about remunerating shareholders. And so we found this idea in the Tilak reform with the same concept of MDA applied at Tilak level. And so the objective, roughly the same, is to prohibit distribution of dividends to shareholders in a situation of non-respect of the Tilak requirements. My point is to say that we believe we'll change from a world where the focus was on CET1 and where you stand regarding your level of CET1 to a world where the question would be, how do you stand in terms of TLAC and MDA over TLAC? And to illustrate this, I'd like to show you those very simple examples. If I take the case of a bank with a 100 billion RWA, 8% CET1 requirement, and I assume there is a management buffer of 2 billion to make sure that the MDA threshold will not be breached. What I need to have at the end of the year to breach this is a 2.5 loss on my net results. If I take the case of TLAC and I keep my case, 100 billion RWA, TLAC requirements of 18%, and I keep my 2 billion margin over as a management buffer, what I need to have to breach my TLAC requirement is not being able of renewing my subordinated debt of only 1.1 billion. So the question is, how likely is it that on the first case, you will suffer from a 2.5 billion loss compared to absence of renewal debt 1.1 billion? What is even more difficult and more sensitive for our CEO and CFO is the sensitivity of the ratio to RWA. If RWA increased by 10% during a crisis, in this case, your CET1 ratio will fall from 10% to 9.1%. And you still have some buffer over your MDA thresholds. In the case of TLAC, because the level is much higher, my ratio falls down from 20% to 18.2%. And I don't even combine this with the fact that I might have difficulty to renew my debt. So the question is highly sensitive for banks. We might have some dilemma or paradox with banks being very well capitalized. And I take the case of BPCE with a CET1 ratio currently at 14%, and the MDA is below 8%, total capital ratio of 18%, and the MDA is below 11%. In this case, we can say that we are well capitalized. Nevertheless, we have to comply with our TLAC ratio. The question is, we can suffer from a lower amount of subordinated debt. The amount of dividends that we currently provide to our mutual shareholders are 300 million per year. Those 300 million need to be put in front of 400 billion of RWA. Basically, if I stop serving interest to my mutual shareholders, I will save 300 million. It will improve my ratio of plus 0.06%. So on one opposite, I will have strengthened my, my ratio by 0.06%, and on the opposite, I will have sent a signal to all my customers, all my mutual shareholders, that I might be in a situation in which I basically need not to serve interest. Remember, I will still be in the case where total capital ratio is very high, CET1 ratio is very high. So what, at the end of the day, what we think is it is important to have thresholds and to have MDA, but then there's a need to have flexibility. And believe me, I have not been sponsored by Mr. Labrex to say this, but we believe MDA implementation on Tilak should be in the hands of authority. It should not be automatic. The other discussion that I would like to have with you is about internal MREL. So the initial question of internal MREL is making sure that a holding company is strongly financially committed to supporting a subsidiary, an entity which holds critical functions locally. And so in the first case, on the bottom left, you can see I have my critical subsidiary, my holding company. I have only 100 of equity. And so the holding company is legally binded to absorb the losses up to 100, and that's it. On the right side, you can see what happened with internal MREL, which is an interesting enhancement. You put internal subordinated debt, and so if asset value decrease in my subsidiary, the holding company legally binded to absorb losses up to 100 and to participate to the recap up to 80. Now again, I'd like to introduce you with the world of cooperative banks. It's a word that is complicated, but nevertheless, it does exist, and it accounts for a large part of the financing of the economy. So in a cooperative bank, you have on the top mutual shareholders, and then you have banks, and then you have a central body acting as the holding company, let's say, and then you have subsidiaries. What you have in many, if not all, cooperative banks is an internal solidarity mechanism. So mechanism that by law requires the central body to recapitalize any affiliated members. The central body has cannot say, I will not do it. It's a requirement by law. And more interesting, it has all the legal power to do it, meaning any bank affiliated to the group cannot say, I do not want to participate in the recap of one member. And so regarding internal MREL, what we think is it's a valid enhancement and valid amendment of BRRD to strengthen financial stability. Compared to existing legal requirements for cooperative banking groups, we believe it's redundant. It is less powerful because there is no limitation in the case of solidarity mechanism. And it's also more limited because you're only targeting specific entities and not all. And finally, the guidelines of the Financial Stability Board included in the beginning the question of the perimeter of solidarity to discuss this. All right, thank you very much.